The startup called itself Disruptive. Exposed brick walls, standing desks, a neon slogan glowing above the open workspace, "Move fast." Engineers in hoodies spoke loudly about scale, growth, and vision. Confidence filled the room like background noise. At the far end of the office sat Aaron Lewis. He was 20, black, quiet, and the youngest person in the room by at least 5 years. His intern badge was clipped to a borrowed lanyard. His laptop was old enough to sound tired when it booted up, but it ran clean code, the kind no one noticed until it failed to exist. Aaron didn't talk much, not because he lacked ideas, but because he had learned that questions made people uncomfortable. Still, on his third week, something bothered him. The startup's core app, the one demoed to investors, had begun slowing under load. Error logs piled up quietly in the background while the team focused on polishing UI and preparing a launch announcement. Aaron traced the issue line by line: memory leaks, unchecked API calls, a scaling assumption copied blindly from a blog post. During stand-up, his hand went up. "I think we're going to hit a server crash if concurrent users spike," Aaron said carefully. "The request handling isn't throttled and—" The room went silent for half a second. Then someone laughed. A senior engineer leaned back in his chair. "We've already stress-tested it." Aaron nodded. "I know, but the test didn't simulate." The CTO cut him off. "Let's not overthink," he said, smiling tightly. "This is how innovation dies." A few people nodded. Aaron lowered his hand. Later that day, he sent a short internal message with screenshots, logs, and a suggestion for refactoring. No one replied. The next morning, Aaron was called into a glass-walled meeting room. The CEO and CTO sat across from him, laptops closed. "This isn't working," the CEO said. Aaron blinked. "I'm sorry." "You're not a culture fit," the CTO added. "Too cautious. Too many questions." Aaron nodded slowly. They didn't ask about the code. They didn't open the logs. They thanked him for his time and escorted him out before lunch. As Aaron stepped onto the sidewalk, his phone buzzed. A notification from the app's public dashboard. Latency spike detected. He stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped the phone into his pocket and kept walking. That night, in his small bedroom, Aaron opened his laptop and began building something of his own. Not to compete, not to prove a point, but because unanswered questions don't disappear, they wait. And somewhere inside the startup's servers, a failure was already forming, patient and precise. It would arrive exactly when Aaron said it would. And when it did, the company that fired an intern for asking questions would learn the difference between moving fast and knowing where you're going. Aaron Lewis didn't celebrate being fired. He woke up the next morning at the same time out of habit, brewed cheap coffee and opened his laptop like nothing had changed. The difference was that no one could interrupt him now. No one could tell him to stop asking why. He pulled up the notes he'd taken during his internship. Not company secrets, not stolen code, just observations. Patterns, architectural mistakes anyone willing to look long enough could see. He rebuilt the app's flow from scratch. Not the interface, not the branding, the logic. Aaron designed his version to expect failure instead of pretending it wouldn't happen. He added throttling where the startup had ignored it, cues where they had assumed speed, graceful degradation instead of blind confidence. At night, while the city slept, he simulated traffic on his own machine. Thousands of concurrent users, then tens of thousands. His app slowed, but it didn't break. Across town, the startup's launch countdown ticked closer to zero. Press mentions increased. Investors tweeted excitement. The team posted photos from the office, smiling faces, captions about building the future. No one mentioned infrastructure. Aaron watched quietly. On launch day, he wasn't refreshing social media. He was watching logs. At 10:17 a.m., his phone buzzed. CPU usage critical. Not his, theirs. He opened the public status page. At first, it showed degraded performance, then partial outage, then nothing at all. User complaints flooded the App Store. Won't load, keeps crashing. Worked for 5 minutes, then died. Screenshots spread on Twitter faster than fixes. Inside the startup, engineers scrambled. Servers auto-scaled too late, then too aggressively. Costs understandinglessly spiked. Requests looped endlessly. The system collapsed under the exact condition Aaron had warned them about. Meanwhile, Aaron pushed his own app live. No announcement, no hype, just a quiet launch to a small group of testers he'd met online. It held. That evening, as the startup's CEO issued an apology blaming unexpected demand, Aaron received his first email from a stranger. "What are you running this on? It shouldn't work this smoothly." Aaron smiled faintly. He typed back a short reply. "I assumed it would fail." And in that simple sentence lived the difference between someone who feared questions and someone who built answers. The outage lasted longer than anyone expected. At first, people joked about it, memes, sarcastic posts, jokes about beta culture, but as hours stretched into a full day, the tone changed. Businesses that depended on the startup's app lost money, users lost trust, investors stopped tweeting. Inside the company, the neon Move Fast sign was turned off. Engineers slept on couches, meetings blurred together. Every fix created a new problem. Every patch exposed another assumption that should never have been made. Someone finally pulled up Aaron's old message in the internal chat, the one with logs attached, the one no one had replied to. No one said his name out loud. They didn't need to. Across town, Aaron's inbox filled slowly, then steadily, not with praise, with questions. How did you handle concurrency? Why didn't your queues overload? What happens if traffic doubles again? Aaron answered carefully. Technically, honestly, he didn't exaggerate. He didn't insult the other team. He simply explained what he had done and why. A small tech blog published a comparison article. No drama, just data. The headline didn't mention Aaron's firing. It didn't need to. 2 apps launched, only 1 planned for success. By the end of the week, Aaron's user base had grown tenfold. Not viral growth, trust-based growth. Developers shared the app with other developers. Word travelled through private channels, not hype cycles. One evening, Aaron received a message from a venture partner. "Heard you built this alone. Want to talk?" Aaron stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop and went for a walk. He passed office buildings with lights still on, people rushing to fix things that should have been built differently from the start. He thought about the meeting room where he had been told he asked too many questions. He realized something then. They hadn't fired him because he was wrong. They had fired him because listening would have slowed them down. The next morning, Aaron agreed to the meeting. Not because he needed validation, but because his app was about to grow beyond what one person could responsibly manage alone. And this time, he would choose a culture that welcomed questions, not feared them. Because somewhere between a glass-walled office and a silent server crash, Aaron Lewis had learned the quiet truth of innovation. Speed impresses investors, but understanding keeps systems alive, and the intern they dismissed was no longer asking for permission to be heard. He was being asked how he built something that didn't break when it mattered most. The meeting took place in a small conference room with no branding on the walls, no slogans, no neon signs, just a table, a whiteboard, and people who listened before they spoke. Aaron Lewis sat across from 3 investors, laptop closed, hands resting calmly in front of him. They asked thoughtful questions, not about growth hacks or viral loops, but about failure modes, safeguards, and what he would do if everything went wrong at once. Aaron answered without rushing. "I assume something will break," he said, "so I design for when it does." They nodded. 2 weeks later, Aaron incorporated the company. Not as a founder chasing headlines, but as an engineer building a system meant to last. He hired slowly. He interviewed carefully. One question mattered more than any other. What's something you were wrong about recently? If the answer came too easily, or too defensively, he passed. Meanwhile, the startup that had fired him never fully recovered. They patched the servers, rebranded slightly, changed messaging, but trust didn't scale the way traffic once had. Users remembered the crash more clearly than the apology. Months later, Aaron received an email from the former CTO. Short. Uncomfortable. You were right. We should have listened. Aaron read it once, then archived it. He didn't reply, not out of bitterness, but because the lesson no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the systems they would build next, or fail to. One evening, Aaron stood in his new office, modest, quiet, intentionally boring. The servers hummed steadily. Dashboards glowed green, no alerts, no emergencies. He remembered the moment his hand went up in stand-up, the silence that followed, the laughter that dismissed him. He smiled faintly. Questions hadn't slowed him down. They had guided him. As his app expanded into schools, non-profits, and small businesses that couldn't afford failure, Aaron insisted on one principle written plainly in the onboarding document. Curiosity is not a threat. Years from now, people would tell the story differently. They'd say the intern got revenge, that his app crashed the other company. But Aaron knew the truth. He hadn't broken anything. He had simply built something that didn't ignore the cracks. And when the servers held, under pressure, under doubt, under scale, it wasn't because he moved fast. It was because he stopped, asked the right questions, and refused to be silent when the answers mattered. The startup fired an intern for asking questions. The questions built a system that stayed standing, and that difference, quiet, unglamorous, permanent, was the real disruption. 5 years later, Aaron Lewis rarely talked about the startup that fired him, not because he had forgotten it, but because it no longer defined anything he was building. His company occupied 2 quiet floors of a modest building, far from the glass towers that celebrated speed over substance. There were no slogans on the walls, no neon lights, just whiteboards filled with diagrams, questions written in different handwriting, and servers that hummed with steady confidence. Aaron walked through the office every morning, greeting people by name. Engineers asked questions here, they argued, they paused launches, they slowed things down when something felt wrong, and no one was punished for it. One afternoon, a nervous intern raised her hand during a review meeting. "I might be wrong," she said, voice shaking slightly, "but I think this could fail under load." The room went quiet. Aaron leaned forward. "Show us," he said. They delayed the release by a week. The system held. That evening, Aaron stayed late, watching traffic graphs flatten into calm lines instead of spikes. He remembered how close he had once come to believing that silence was safer than curiosity. Across town, the old startup still existed, smaller now, quieter, no longer setting trends. Occasionally, their engineers applied for roles at Aaron's company. Some were hired, none were asked about the past, the lesson had already been learned. On his way home, Aaron passed the building where he'd once been escorted out with a cardboard box in his hands. The neon sign was gone, the windows dark. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. Because success, he had learned, wasn't about proving people wrong loudly. It was about building something so stable that it made noise unnecessary. Aaron unlocked his apartment, set his laptop down, and opened a document he kept updated for new hires. At the top, in plain text, was a single line: "If you see a problem and stay silent, you're not helping." Below it were questions. Always questions. And as the servers continued to run, quietly, reliably, without drama, Aaron knew that the intern who had once been fired for asking too much had built something far more disruptive than speed. He had built a place where curiosity survived, and that, more than any crash or headline, was what lasted.